Welcome to True Crime Threads. Today we dive into a chilling tale of betrayal and murder. Nathan Adler, a 34-year-old devoted husband and father of two, seemed to have it all. Living in a quiet suburban neighborhood, he had a successful career in finance and a seemingly blissful marriage to his wife, Clara. Their home was warm and inviting, the kind of place where neighbors waved as they passed by and the sound of children's laughter echoed through the streets. They had been together for 10 years, building a life that appeared picture-perfect. Their two children, Emma and Noah, were the center of their world. Nathan prided himself on being a dedicated father, always there for school plays, soccer games, and family dinners. He and Clara were the envy of their friends, always smiling, always happy. Nathan's best friend, Scott Turner, often visited the family. The two men had known each other since college and were inseparable, sharing inside jokes and countless memories. Their bond was strong, built on years of camaraderie, shared triumphs, and a few heartaches. Scott was an easygoing, charismatic man who could light up any room with his laughter. To outsiders, Nathan and Scott were more like brothers. They often spent weekends watching sports together or catching up over drinks, and Scott frequently joined Nathan and Clara for family meals. Their relationship was comfortable, built on trust and mutual respect. Nathan considered Scott a part of the family, always the first person to offer help when needed. Clara, too, was fond of Scott, and their relationship seemed as natural as Nathan and Scott's friendship. She enjoyed his company, often chatting about trivial matters while the men talked business. They joked around, shared memories, and Scott became a regular at their home, especially during holidays. Clara would often make dinner for the three of them, and it was clear that everyone felt comfortable with the arrangement. The dynamic was effortless, and no one questioned it. But over time, Nathan began noticing subtle changes in Clara's behavior. She would spend more time on her phone, texting late into the night, always just a little too protective of her screen. At first, Nathan brushed it off, thinking it was just the pressures of daily life. But the small, unexplained moments began to accumulate: Clara's growing distance, her occasional irritability, and her late-night outings with vague explanations. It wasn't until he found a stray hairbrush in the bathroom that wasn't his, and Clara seemed particularly flustered when he mentioned it, that he began to wonder if there was more to the story. Nathan was no fool. He knew something wasn't right, but he struggled to confront his suspicions, still clinging to the idea that everything was fine. The perfect life he had worked so hard to create was slipping from his grasp, and he wasn't yet ready to face the truth. Nathan's suspicions grew when he stumbled upon a series of cryptic text messages on Clara's phone. The messages were affectionate, playful, and far from the tone one would expect between casual acquaintances. The sender was none other than Scott Turner, Nathan's best friend. At first, Nathan assumed it was nothing, just a friendly exchange. But as he read further, he realized the messages went beyond casual conversation. They were filled with intimate remarks, inside jokes, and comments that made Nathan feel like an outsider in his own marriage. His heart began to race, and a sickening feeling crept over him as he scrolled through the texts. Confronting Clara was the next logical step. He asked her about the messages, expecting her to dismiss them or offer a reasonable explanation. Clara was quick to respond, brushing it off as nothing more than playful banter between old friends. She claimed the texts were harmless, and that there was nothing to worry about. Nathan wanted to believe her, but something about her response felt off, too rehearsed, too defensive. Despite Clara's assurances, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He decided to dig deeper. Late one evening, when Clara was out running errands, Nathan spent hours searching through their home for more clues. He went through drawers, checked her email, and even scrolled through the photos on her phone. His heart sank further when he discovered pictures of Clara and Scott together taken during weekends away, dinner dates, and other outings he had never been informed about. There was no mistaking it: Clara and Scott had been hiding something from him, and the evidence was irrefutable. The realization hit Nathan like a punch to the gut. His best friend, the man he had trusted with his life, had crossed a line he never thought possible. And his wife, the woman he had vowed to love and cherish, had betrayed him in the worst possible way. The pain of this discovery was overwhelming, but Nathan knew he had to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. He decided he would confront Scott first. The betrayal wasn't just a matter of Clara's infidelity, it was the fact that his closest friend had been involved. He needed answers. With a heavy heart, Nathan sent Scott a message, asking him to meet at a local bar the following evening. He didn't know what he was going to say, but he knew one thing for sure: the truth was coming to light, and there was no turning back. As the hours ticked by, Nathan wrestled with his emotions, trying to figure out how he would confront the man who had shattered his trust. The storm inside him grew stronger by the minute. On a cold November evening, Nathan received a message from Scott asking to meet at a nearby park to clear the air. Nathan was conflicted, but knew this confrontation was inevitable. He had to face his friend, the person who had once been his brother, and demand an explanation. He couldn't let this betrayal linger any longer. Despite his fear, there was a sense of finality to this meeting. It was now or never. Nathan told Clara about the meeting, trying to sound composed, but her reaction was unnervingly calm. She didn't show any sign of concern or worry, only nodding as if it was just another ordinary conversation. The park was deserted that evening, the leaves crunching underfoot as Nathan made his way along the winding path. The air was crisp, a chill creeping into his bones as he arrived at the agreed spot. The dim streetlights cast long shadows, and the silence seemed oppressive, adding to the tension in Nathan's chest. When he spotted Scott in the distance, standing by the edge of the park, a sickly knot formed in his stomach. The man who had once been his closest confidant now felt like a stranger. Scott greeted him with a strained smile, but Nathan could see through it. His usual easygoing demeanor was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable stiffness. They stood there for a moment, the awkwardness palpable, before Nathan finally spoke, his voice unsteady but determined. He didn't need to say much, his heart already knew the truth. He laid bare his suspicions, detailing the texts and the photos he had discovered, the secret meetings between Scott and Clara that had been hidden in plain sight. Scott's response was a mix of guilt and defensiveness, but Nathan could see the unease in his eyes. There was no denying it anymore. The lies were unraveling in front of them, and Scott seemed at a loss for words. The confrontation quickly spiraled into an argument, their friendship disintegrating with each passing second. Anger and hurt welled up inside Nathan, and he felt betrayed in ways he couldn't begin to articulate. His voice cracked with emotion as he demanded answers, but Scott remained quiet, his gaze shifting uneasily. But before Nathan could say anything else, a sudden sharp pain seared through his back. He gasped, his body falling to the ground in shock. The world seemed to tilt, and everything around him blurred. Scott stood over him, eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and determination, but Nathan's vision was fading fast. The last thing he saw was Clara, emerging from the shadows, a knife glinting in her hand, before everything went black. The pain was unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the crushing realization that his worst fears had come true. The people he loved most had betrayed him, and now they were ensuring he would never be able to expose their treachery. Nathan's body was discovered the following morning by a jogger, who immediately called the police. The scene initially appeared to support the robbery narrative, with his wallet missing, his car parked nearby, and his phone discarded in the dirt. But something didn't add up. The officer who arrived first on the scene noted that Nathan's watch, an expensive, rare piece, was still on his wrist, and his phone was found in a place that seemed too deliberately positioned. There was no sign of struggle near the body, no indication that Nathan had fought back in a desperate attempt to save himself. This small detail raised immediate red flags. Detective Rachel Monroe, a seasoned investigator known for her attention to detail, was assigned to the case. Upon examining the scene, she quickly determined that it didn't quite fit the pattern of a random attack. The location, the lack of physical altercation, and the discarded items led her to suspect that this was not an ordinary robbery gone wrong. She dug deeper into Nathan's background, searching for a motive that could explain the killing. Interviews with Nathan's colleagues, friends, and neighbors painted a picture of a man who was loved and respected. There were no known enemies, and his life appeared stable and content, save for some increasing tension at home. Nathan had been acting differently in the weeks leading up to his death. He was quieter, more distant, as though carrying a heavy burden. His work colleagues had noticed it too, but no one suspected that his personal life was unraveling. A breakthrough came when one of Nathan's close colleagues revealed to Detective Monroe that Nathan had recently expressed concerns about his wife, Clara, and his best friend, Scott. He'd confided that he believed something was going on between them, though he hadn't provided many details. It was the missing piece that linked the murder to a possible motive of betrayal. The investigation turned to Clara and Scott. Monroe and her team traced Clara's phone records and discovered that she had been in the vicinity of the park on the night Nathan was killed. Surveillance footage from nearby stores revealed that Scott had purchased gloves, cleaning supplies, and a set of tools several hours before Nathan's death. The detective also found that Scott had visited Clara the evening before the murder, suggesting they had met in secret to finalize their plan. The final break came when an anonymous tip-off led Monroe to a neighbor who had overheard Clara and Scott arguing just a day before Nathan's death. The tipster reported hearing them discuss getting their story straight, mentioning how they would make sure Nathan's body wouldn't be found for hours. This crucial information gave the detectives the concrete evidence they needed to move forward with arrests. Confronted with overwhelming evidence, both Clara and Scott were arrested and charged with Nathan's murder. The case quickly became the talk of the town, with shocked neighbors and friends struggling to understand how two people who had been so trusted could betray Nathan in such a brutal way. Clara, once the doting wife, and Scott, Nathan's best friend, were now the prime suspects in the crime that had shattered the community. During the trial, the prosecution painted a chilling picture of the calculated plan Clara and Scott had devised. They had carefully orchestrated Nathan's death, luring him to the park with the pretense of a simple conversation, knowing full well that it would be their chance to end his life. The motive was clear. Clara had been having an affair with Scott for months, and the two of them had decided that Nathan was in the way of their future together. Scott's involvement was rooted in a twisted loyalty to Clara, driven by the promise of a new life without Nathan standing in their way. They had both acted out of selfishness and greed, willing to kill the person who had once been their closest friend in order to preserve their secret. The defense attempted to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, but the jury saw through the lies. Clara's cold demeanor in court only further confirmed her guilt. She sat motionless, her eyes occasionally glancing at Scott, but she showed no emotion or remorse. Scott, on the other hand, appeared uncomfortable, occasionally shifting in his seat as the details of the murder were revealed. It was clear that neither of them had any genuine remorse for what they had done. They were focused only on saving themselves. The prosecution also revealed how they had attempted to stage the murder scene, making it appear as though Nathan had been a victim of a robbery gone wrong. They had carefully arranged his belongings and left the knife used to kill him hidden near his body. But it was their carelessness in the aftermath, leaving behind phone records, surveillance footage, and a trail of lies that ultimately led to their downfall. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before delivering a guilty verdict. Clara and Scott were sentenced to life in prison without parole, their once promising lives reduced to nothing but a cautionary tale of betrayal and greed. As the gavel struck, sealing their fate, the courtroom was filled with a sense of finality. Nathan's death had been avenged, but the damage done to his family could never be undone. Nathan's children, Emma and Noah, were left to grow up without their father, a heartbreaking reminder of the devastating consequences of Clara and Scott's actions. The case left a lasting impact on the community, serving as a grim warning about the dangers of misplaced trust and the devastating cost of infidelity. Nathan's life was stolen from him in an instant, and nothing could ever bring him back. The people who were supposed to protect him had taken everything away. The loss was felt not only by his family but by everyone who had known him, and the silence in the wake of the trial spoke volumes about the destruction caused by the betrayal of those closest to him.